Hey, happy Monday. Come on in, pull up a chair. The Daily Dope is in the air. Howdy, gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back once again as your host here at The Daily Dope, presented by thegaminggang.com. Today is Monday, January 14th, and this is episode 228 of The Daily Dope. Pretty sweet, pretty wild. 228 episodes of this. Wow. Tonight, I am going to show a little bit of how to play. I'm not going to get into a really in-depth how to play, and also review the second edition of Nemo's War from Victory Point Games. That's going to be coming up in just a little bit. And I played the original edition, the Ziploc bag edition way back in the day. I think it was 2011, and reviewed Nemo's War. Really liked it. So I am going to kind of show off a little bit of the game and give you my thoughts on the second edition. So also want to point out this is a live stream. If you happen to be watching live, and I know a vast majority of people tune in way after the fact to catch the show, but if you are watching live, chat is available on YouTube. It is not on screen. It's one of the ways that I kind of keep some of the stranger commenters at bay, but I do pay attention to the chat. So if you want to say hello, or if you have a question, or maybe there's something about Nemo's War second edition that I kind of, skip over or don't get into a whole lot of detail, and you'd like to know more about it, by all means, feel free to chime in. I will respond. So if this is your first time watching, this is a very casual show. I just kind of kick back, talk a bit about tabletop gaming news, do some reviews, some unboxings. Do want to point out that tonight I do not have any news. I don't have any news for you tonight, and I know some people are going to be like, yay, no news. I don't know. I personally like the tabletop gaming news of the day, and I know a lot of other viewers do too. I know there's just a few people out there who are not big fans of it, but that being said, I do have an announcement to make regarding the Gaming Gang as well as the Daily Dope that I do want to talk about. I want to get into a little bit of detail, not a ton, but a little bit. So those of you who do not want to hear about the new announcement, the big announcement, by all means, take a look in the show notes below. There's timestamps. You can skip right ahead. So on to the announcement. And I know people today have been thinking that I'm going to announce something bad, and it's not. It's not something bad at all. So, last week I'm doing my thing, right? I'm online, and I'm working on pulling up news pieces and getting images together and things like that. And I see something on Twitter from somebody I follow, and I got to admit, I am not the sort of person who sits around watching cat videos or animal videos. I don't spend a lot of time watching meme stuff. You know, I don't get into all that kind of stuff. But somebody posted a picture that I just thought was the most adorable thing I had ever seen in my entire life. One of the most adorable. Maybe not the most adorable, but one of the most adorable. And, oh, come on. I thought I cleared this stuff out. Ay. There we go. That's what happens when I'm trying to put the finishing touches on stuff, and it's a live show. What can I tell you? So anyway, so I see this picture and I'm like, oh wow, that is just hysterical, right? It's this little cat. It's got a little cap on. So I go and I find out what exactly is this cat? You know, what is this Twitter feed? Now I have to point out that I am usually like the last to the party on a lot of things. So it turns out that this kitty is named Lillian Bubbles, or Lil Bub for short. And it is one of the most popular cats online. It is hugely popular. Knew nothing about this, right? So so I started peeking around. So I find that there's actually a website for Lil Bub. And let's make sure that we got all these images cleared out of here so other stuff doesn't start popping up. There we go. No, the other images I have are cool. I got distracted by something before I went live while I was in the middle of doing that. All right, so anyway, the cat has a website, lilbub.com. And I am not going to go into the laundry list of genetic problems or challenges that this cat has. I mean, there's just loads. Like, you notice the little tongue sticking out. Well, it's because the cat's bottom jaw is a little underdeveloped, so the tongue sticks out. The cat was a runt of a litter in Indiana. No one thought the cat was going to survive. Cat doesn't have any teeth. It's kind of a dwarf cat, so it's small. It only weighs about 4 pounds. Its eyes are a little bigger than normal. And probably the worst part of it is the cat does suffer from a bone disease, which normally is very, very rare, and it shows up sometimes in elderly cats, but never in a young cat. And I want to say it's called osteoperontos or something like that. It's not the osteo whatever. You know what I'm talking about, that the adults get. A lot of women get that. Osteoporosis. There we go. Osteoporosis. I believe it's called osteoparentis or something like that this little cat has. So this cat becomes a huge hit. There's actually a documentary, Little Bub and Friends, that I watched, which is from, I think, like 2013. And I got to admit, this little cat is super inspiring. Not only is the cat inspiring, the cat's owner as well is just it just warms your heart to watch this. So anyway, so I watched the documentary, all this. Hey, Paul Nolan's popping in. Hiya, Paul. Good to have you popping in. So anyway, so I watched this documentary. So I've been checking out this stuff all about Lil Bub and Lil Bub's owner and the dude. Just say the dude. And now the dude has a wife, so I guess we'll refer to the dude's wife as the dudette. And just the wonderful work that they do as far as raising money for charity. And Lil Bub has raised over $500,000 for animals, and mainly for animals in need. So anyway, so I check out all this different stuff, and I'm a softie. Try to hide that fact that I'm pretty soft-hearted, because too many people in this world mistake kindness for weakness, and that is not the case. So anyway, so I'm like, okay, there's got to be a way. I'm going to make a donation to this lilbub.com. And I didn't see something where you could just say, hey, here's a one-time donation. I just want to make a donation. I don't want anything. So I didn't see anything like that. There is a store that's got all different stuff. So I'm peeking around, and I saw this. I'll pull it back a little bit. So this is Lil Bub dressed as a wizard, right? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I gotta get this. I have got to get this. And of course, a portion of the sale went to Lil Bub's charity. And I was like, oh, I had just got to get this, and I am going to put this up. This is going to go right behind me, and we're going to put it in a spot that we can see it all the time. So I'm going to put Lil Wiz Bub, or I guess we could say Wiz Lil Bub, right there. And like I said, I'm a big dork, right? So anyway, I know, I promise I will get to my review of Nemo's War. So I just want to say that when the gaming gang started up back in 2010, it was myself and my best friend, Elliot Miller. And of course, since then, Elliot has moved on to run his own website, voiceofv.com. We're still best friends. I mean, we're actually, we live much closer together now than we did back when I launched the gaming gang. And really, the reason why the gaming gang actually started off with Elliot and I was mainly for us to stay in touch and be involved in each other's lives a little bit more than we had been. I mean, we would talk usually like every week, every 2 weeks, something like that. And of course, he and I had both been playing tabletop games since the late 70s. So Elliot had gotten back really into board games and that, and I had moved kind of more into computer games and stuff, but I still enjoyed role playing games, things like that. And I said to Elliot, I said, hey, because he was talking about, and I'm not naming any names, so he was talking about different podcasts and stuff like that, and he said, hey, you should check these out. And I checked them out. And I thought, hey, these are okay, but I thought we could do better. Now, I'm not saying we did. I'm just saying I thought we could do better. And we had our podcast, and that was pretty popular and stuff. But I got to point out, at no point when the Gaming Gang launched, or in the nearly 9 years since, I'm in my 9th year covering the tabletop gaming hobby, at no point was this to make money, right? This was never to get rich or to say, okay, well, don't need a day job anymore, I'm doing this. No, never. Which is a good thing, because I'd be in real trouble if that was the case, because I've never really made any money. So it's a good thing that wasn't the game plan in the first place. That being said, so I have decided from here on out, it's not for the month of January, it's not for like the first 6 months of 2019, anything like that. From here on out, I am going to be donating everything that comes into the Gaming Gang, thus, of course, the Daily Dope, although the Daily Dope really doesn't generate any kind of financial boom. Outside of what the operating costs are for the website, I am going to donate everything that comes into the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and Lil Bub's Big Fund. Reason why. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there like, oh man, charities, not all the money goes to where it's supposed to go, and I completely understand that. I completely understand it, and there are certain aspects of the ASPCA that 100% of the funds don't actually go to shelters, things like that. With Lil Bub's Big Fund, all the funds do go to help special needs animals across the country. 100%. All these funds are distributed as grants to organizations to support cats and dogs that need special care or extra help getting adopted because maybe they suffer from a physical deformity or a birth defect, or maybe they have mobility impairment, which is something that learning about Lil Bub had really terrible issues with mobility impairment, which thankfully have been taken care of. Maybe these animals are blind or deaf, or maybe someone has abused these animals, or maybe they've been involved in a disaster or accident or something like that, or maybe they're just old like me. Maybe that's the case. Anyway, do want to point out all profits outside of those to keep the website operating and producing this show. So as an example, if I have a camera breakdown, or if I have a capture device breakdown, something like that, which, knock on wood, that has not happened. I have not had a camera crap out or anything like that. Anything that comes in above and beyond what it costs me to pay for my hosting for the website every month, things like that, is going to be donated to Lil Bub's Big Fund. And I know people are going to think this is weird. It's just how I am. I have always loved animals. I have always had a very soft spot for little underdog animals that things aren't necessarily going their way, right? Everything's not lining up perfectly for them. I'm going to wrap up the Patreon in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to let my patrons on Patreon know that if they'd like, by all means, that they can make a donation to the Little Bub's Big Fund at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or ASPCA. I guess I should say that. It's a little easier for me to get out. So I'm going to be wrapping up my Patreon. I have already started to, I'm starting to get people companies I've never worked with before, always love to contact me to ask about, oh, could you share our Kickstarter news? We got a Kickstarter coming out, things like that. Now, they haven't sent me a preview copy, anything like that, but they want to get, their news out to my audience, not necessarily here on the show, but more so on the Gaming Gang website. I'm going to ask these folks if they want me to share their news. They're going to have to make a small donation to the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And they're going to have to send me a screenshot showing that they've done that. Otherwise, I am not going to share their Kickstarter news. People want to do interviews to promote their products, things like that. I'm going to ask them to do the same thing. Granted, I'm not asking them to make a $50 donation. I'm talking like $5, right? I already got some pushback. I'm not going to mention the company. It's somebody I'd never worked with before, never heard of before. They asked me this afternoon if I would share some Kickstarter info, and I shot them an email back with the link to Lil Bub's Big Fund, and said, hey, I'd love to get this info out. Do me a favor. You're asking me to help you raise thousands of dollars. Least you can do is make a $5 donation to the ASPCA. And they emailed me back and they said, oh, no, thanks. Whatever, fine. Good. Okay, I'm just not going to share their Kickstarter news. Something that more people are probably going to be very interested in is I am going to begin auctioning off games as well. I don't need tons and tons of games, right? It's not as if I stand here in front of a huge big wall. I mean, most of the wall you don't even see behind me, because I replaced some of the lighting. So that's why I'm zoomed in more now. In case people didn't realize that, is because I changed up some of the lighting. And if I pull out further, then you get a bunch of glare, especially up in this area here. So anyway, I'm going to do some game auctions, and everything outside of the cost of shipping is going to get donated to Lil Bub's Big Fund. So what I'm basically saying to people is, and I'm going to put this up on the website as well. In fact, I already have a little kind of like little ads up. If you like the Gaming Gang, then support Lil Bub and the ASPCA. And there is the link as well. I mean, I can't get over this cat. This cat is just, not only is the cat just a really amazing looking cat. If you check out some of the videos and you'll learn about the story of Lil Bub, it's amazing. Cat just turned not too long ago 7 years old, and no one expected this cat to survive. So that is my announcement. That's my big announcement. I am no longer going to look to try to make any sort of profit from the Gaming Gang or from the Daily Dope, which, like I said, the Daily Dope doesn't really do anything profitable, really. Although, okay, I take that back. There a few bucks come in from YouTube. Not a lot, just and it's like, takes a while for it to 6 months or so. But that too will all be donated to the ASPCA and Lil Bub's Big Fund. And I will share the donation information that I make. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, I'm just running my mouth saying I'm going to do this. No, I'm doing it. And the reason is, I just, I've loved animals my entire life. I feel responsibility. I'm getting older. I may not be around here for much longer. So be nice to make an impact. Plus, you know what? I got to say, if you are out there and let's say you're single, right? And you don't have a pet. If you adopt, and of course, if you're going to get a pet, please go to a shelter and adopt. Every animal that I've ever had, that I've had a call of adopting, right? Bringing into my home. I'm not talking about when I was a kid and we had a dog when I was a little kid. I'm talking about as an adult. I have always either they've either been feral or they have come from a shelter. But I was going to say, if you're single, you don't have children, you're not married, nothing is going to bring you the satisfaction and just love as having a pet. I know a lot of people think, oh man, yeah, it's just a pain. It's a pain in my ass. It's not. It is so worth it. And if you think about it, you got all these animals out there. Maybe they've got some sort of little defect or something like that. And, maybe they're just like I said, maybe they're like me. They're old. Maybe the animal's just kind of old. And people don't want to adopt, an older animal. Take that pet home. You will not have any kind of satisfaction outside of getting married and maybe having a child, as you will when you share your home and your love with an animal. All right, so there you have it. That is that's my announcement. So I know people are going to think I'm goofy. Then again, it's never stopped me before. Doesn't really matter, right? It's my website, my show. I do what I want. All right, so moving right along. So I am going to be taking a look at Nemo's War 2nd Edition from Victory Point Games, designed by Chris Taylor with artwork provided by Ian O'Toole. Game is for 1 player, with a variant to play with up to 4 players. It's for ages 14 and up, plays in about an hour or 2. Box says 90 minutes, that's pretty fair. It does carry an MSRP of $75. It is not available right this moment. There was a recent Kickstarter. We should be seeing Nemo's War back in stock, both through Victory Point Games as well as your friendly local game stores and online retailers very soon. There is also an expansion that does carry an MSRP of $10. So let's shoot on over to the other camera now. For a change, my mug is not on camera tonight. Usually my face is like right up in here. But this game takes up a lot of real estate. Not a ton of real estate, but it does take up some real estate here. So I wanted to try to fit in as much of the game as I possibly can. So right now you are seeing the entire game board. So I do want to point out the camera's actually kind of far up here. So I'm not going to be zooming in and out. So first thing I'm going to do is explain Nemo's War basically is a solitaire game, although like I said, there are some variations for you to be able to play it with more players, cooperatively and semi-cooperatively. I'll mention that at the end of the review. But the game really is set for a single player. And the single player is basically taking on the role of Captain Nemo as the events from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea transpire. In the first edition of the game, I do recall there were fewer adventure cards. So we've got an adventure card deck here, which I've already seeded. I've already put together based on the rules from the rule book here. And then we've got some leftover adventure cards, which will go into this spot here, which we can actually spend our action points to draw more adventure cards from this deck. As far as the game itself, let's kind of tour the board a little bit, and I will kind of discuss each of these areas. So we have our adventure deck. Now there's 31 cards. The premise is we need to make it through this deck till we get to the finale card. There are a variety of finale cards, which look like so. And you will randomly select one of these cards secretly, and you will shuffle it within the last 5 cards of this deck over here. So you never know exactly when the game will come to an end. Now, there are plenty of ways for the game to end before you get to the finale card. This is the notoriety track here, and depending on what Captain Nemo's motive is, his modus operandi, is going to determine if you lose the game automatically when you hit a certain level of notoriety. So you're going to start off down here at 0. It is not going to stay at 0 for very long. Actually, I do want to point out kind of a cool little wooden piece here. There's also a counter for that little skull and crossbones, but kind of cool. We got this little cut wood piece. We also have a little cut wood piece for the action points as well on the track. So different things will raise the notoriety of Captain Nemo and the Nautilus, thus incenting the navies of the world to mobilize and try to track down the Nautilus and sink the Nautilus and stop Captain Nemo. So we have, if we go along here, we do see we've got some of these ships. So we're going to have all these different ships. And we even have the Mary Celeste ghost ship. That's one of the ships in the game. There's a sea monster. These are all real ships that were serving in the 1890s-ish, 1880s, 1890s. So we've got these different ship counters here. Now these are reinforcements. So these are more powerful ships than in the beginning of the game. So you're going to need a couple of opaque containers. So once again, I've got Lego Batman doing some duty here as an opaque container. I've got a bunch of the ships in here. So what'll happen is you'll have ships in the various different oceans. When you go to find out what the ship is, you reach in and randomly pull out a ship. So for an example, that would be an armed frigate as opposed to an unarmed non-warship. This is just a sailing ship, but it does tell you what it is. It tells you, okay, so this is a slaver. It's a slave ship. So we've got all the various different ships. We do have in the upper corner of the warship counters, we do see the different numbers here. That's for combat. This one does not have a notoriety on it. Some of them will have, here we go. For example, see that skull? Sinking this ship will raise your notoriety. So we've got that. So we've got Lego Batman with the ships there. And I'm using my my good old Game of Thrones cup here, which actually needs to be cleaned. It's awfully dusty. I just tossed these in here. We're going to use this for treasure tokens, treasure counters. So we will go and we will try to discover treasures. And some of the adventure cards will also tell us to draw a treasure. So some of these treasures might just say, oh, well, we'll get victory points, or, oh, well, you've got an encounter with something. So put that off to the side as well. So depending on what your motive is how you're going to kind of focus the game. So once again, we've got the notoriety. So here we see, oops, notoriety at 26. If you were playing a scientific motive, if you were playing science as Nemo's motive, which means Nemo's not really looking to wage war against the surface world. If you get to a notoriety of 26 before getting to the finale, that's an automatic defeat. Here, if you're playing Explore, if you hit 36, it's a defeat. If you're playing anti-imperialism, defeat there at 44. And then at 51, if you're playing war, then if your notoriety gets to that point, then you lose, because effectively the nations of the world have pretty much flooded the oceans with warships in a hunt to destroy the Nautilus and to stop Captain Nemo. Then you've got three aspects of the Nautilus itself. We've got Nemo, the crew, as well as the hull of the Nautilus. we're going to see we've got different levels here. So we've got this track that runs down here. So looking at +2, +2, +2, +3, +3, +3. Got +3s, +2s, +1s. Got +2 down to +1s. If you ever reach this spot here, once again, the game ends in defeat. Interestingly enough, the more strain that Nemo actually takes on, the more of a benefit he gives you to your dice rolls. The higher a dice roll modifier he provides. So the crew is just basically the crew members of the Nautilus itself, and of course the hull is the structure of the Nautilus. So we've got different little descriptive titles here, which are kind of cool. So ship shape, crew is fresh, Nemo's strong, unstable, listing, and then defeat. So victory points are a big deal with this game as well. You'll see you got over in this corner here, we've got a victory point track. We've got all these different counters. Let me grab some of them. You don't necessarily have to utilize these, but if you want to kind of have a running tally of how you're doing in the game, then you may want to utilize some of these and the various different victory points you're going to get for different things. I don't have them all out here. I just have a few of them sitting there so you can have an idea. So if your overall victory points, what you can do if you want, you can have, well, these are my single digits, these are my tens, and these are my hundreds. You need over 200 points to even sniff a victory. And it's interesting because the way the different motives work will determine on how many victory points you get for different things. Which, speaking of the motives, there are 4 different motives. And in this area here, you're going to lay down this tile. So on this side, we've got Explorer, we've got Anti-Imperialism, and then we also have War and Science. So, for an example, the recommendation when you first play is to play as an explorer. Nemo's an explorer. And for an example, here it shows us, okay, warship sunk. As for exploring, we get -1 victory point. Non-warship sunk, nothing. Adventure cards, we get nothing. We get no bonuses. Treasure, we get an extra victory point for each treasure. Liberation is actually worth a multiple of 3, Science discovered a multiple of 4, and Wonders seen a multiple of 7 for our victory points. So the reality is, as an explorer, you don't want to engage different ships and fight these various different ships. Now, that said, just because you don't want to fight them does not necessarily mean that the navies of the world are going to just leave you alone to do whatever you want, because they're afraid of Nemo and his Nautilus. So it's something to keep in mind, that even if you were going to do like science, you still have to concern yourself with warships looking to actively engage you. All right, so we've got that area here. Now, this area which runs off the side actually is where you'll have your upgrades for the Nautilus. Now, there's also an expansion for the Nautilus here. So it's an expansion pack number 1, and it includes 12 additional upgrades to the Nautilus. So when you first begin the game, depending on what difficulty level you want to play at, now these are all the expansion upgrades. Depending on the difficulty level you want to play at, which interestingly enough, not only do you have a difficulty level, but you also have the different motives. So for an example, a war motive, in my opinion, tends to be a much more difficult game to survive than a science or exploration, because Nemo is waging war against the surface powers, against the imperial powers. Anti-imperialism, you're actually, if you've ever read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and not just seen the Disney film, then you'll know that Nemo is actually, if memory serves me right, I want to say Nemo is of Indian descent, and his main goal is to free peoples who he feels are under the thumb of imperialist powers. That is really his major beef. So that is one of the aspects of the game too. So you can actually go and you'll have these cubes down here. You can go around and you can try to free these various different subjugated peoples. So that is very cool as well. So there's a lot of ways that you can approach this game. You can approach this more as, well, I don't really want to fight a whole lot. Maybe I'll be forced to at some points. To where it's like, hey, I'm playing Nemo as this crazy dude who's hell-bent on just, sinking every ship he runs across. You can play it that way as well. If you take that, tact, probably not going to win. It's going to be tough. I will admit that I played the war motive a couple of times in the original version. I have not played it in the second edition, but there aren't that many changes to the second edition from the original, just kind of desktop publishing edition, outside of some, just completely top-notch components. There are more adventure cards, I can tell you that for sure. And there are some new wrinkles as well. But I mean, the main gist of the game is pretty much the same. So moving right along, we've got the Nautilus upgrades. So depending on the difficulty level that you decide to play, you can actually get an upgrade that you pay for to begin the game. So as an example here, you might go with an arcane library if, say, you're exploring, right? You may actually decide you want to go with a monstrous design, which in the story itself, people originally think the Nautilus is some sort of a sea monster. So there you go. You got the monstrous design, which will help you not gain as much notoriety. Got electro-powered crew armor, a hydro drive. So you've got a variety, double hull as well, reinforced armor, steam torpedoes. So you got a lot of different things that you can choose from. Now, you do not necessarily have to do an upgrade on the Nautilus to start the game off. If you are taking, say, for an example, the anti-imperialism or the war motive for Nemo, you're gonna want to do some upgrades sooner as opposed to later, because you will find yourself dealing with some pretty tough warships. Speaking of, we see here we've got some more ships. So not only do we have 2 stacks up here that end up becoming reinforcements to our draw over here, once we reach that level of notoriety, we also have more warships that come into play as we progress through the adventure deck. So we have an event number 4, which releases this. We've got an event 38, which releases this. Now, this is just a frigate. This is a capital ship. So this is a much tougher ship. Then when we hit the first intermission, which is so many cards into the game, we're going to hit our first intermission. We're going to add these ships. Then second intermission, we're going to add these ships, which are more powerful again. And keep in mind, we also have, these are dual-sided too. So it's not just the one side here. These are dual-sided. So you can actually get to the point where the warships that you're running across are actually like reinforced, so they're even tougher. Then when we hit Rising Action, which is very close to the finale of the game, we also will include all of these ships into the mix. So as you're playing, you're also going to be sinking ships. Now, even if you're taking a science approach, even if you're taking an explore approach, if those are your motives, at some point you're probably going to have to sink some ships, more along the lines of you're probably sinking non-warships. And you can always go after like slavers and things like that, and you'll be like, oh, okay, I feel good about doing that. Because what'll happen is when you do sink ships, you're going to actually put them on this board here, because depending on your motive, you may be earning victory points for them, but you also may need to use those as salvage. So you can salvage your sunken ships that you've got. You actually forfeit your victory points though to be able to salvage, because that's one of the ways that you're going to be able to get hull points back to the Nautilus, is through salvage. Basically, it's refitting the ship, repairing the ship. I did something to my wrist. I think I don't know what's going on. I think I pulled a tendon or something. I do the cardiovascular rehab 3 days a week, and there's like a kind of like a rowing machine that I use, and I swear I did something to my hand today, because I was like, yeah, I'm gonna try something a little tougher and just do it with one hand for a minute and then do the other hand for a minute, and I was like, I shouldn't have done that. Sorry. Anyway, all right. So continuing to kind of tour around. So we see each of the oceans here. So we've got the Western Pacific, got the South Pacific, Central Pacific, Pacific Coast, the Arctic Ocean, North Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, Cape Horn. So we've got all these various different oceans and different seas. Now, the major seas, the major oceans will have a die at the top of them. So for an example, the Western Pacific is a 1, Eastern Pacific's a 2, North Atlantic is a 3, and so on. We'll see some don't. So for an example, the Arctic Oceans don't have a die. Cape Horn does not have a die. But these locations are actually connected. So when you're moving from ocean to ocean, you're going to actually follow these paths. And of course, these paths have to be in this kind of like aquamarine color for you to be able to go from one sea or one ocean to the next. So I couldn't go from, say, all right, so I'm moving, I go from the Western Pacific to the North Atlantic. No, that's 2 moves, right? Just like I couldn't go from the Western Pacific to the Eastern Pacific, even though it sounds like, oh, well, yeah, Western Pacific, Eastern Pacific. Now I have to go to either Pacific Coast or the Central Pacific. So we do have like connections for placement. We've got connections for like inciting the natives to rise up against the imperial powers. But for the most part, mainly you are going to be basically moving along these paths here. As I point out, there's also the little areas here that, if we're trying to incite the native peoples, that you're going to be putting cubes if you're able to do that. These tokens here, these counters here, represent hidden ships. There are ships that are in that ocean, but we don't know what they are just yet. Also, we see these little diamonds. These represent treasures. There are different treasures that we're looking for. So for an example, we're explorers here in this first game, right? So treasures are a big deal to us. We're trying to find some wonders, because the wonders are going to be worth some good victory points. All right, so then we have here, we've got adventure card test modifiers. So it's going to tell us all about different things on these cards here. We've got action success table, which is right here. We've got our turn sequence is right over here. And then the combat sequence is right here. Now, the rule book itself is kind kind of, I don't want to say hefty, but for some folks out there taking a look at the rule book here, and it is 31 pages long. Some people out there are going to say, "Wow, 31-page rule book. Ooh, that's probably a little more difficult than I want to, take a bite out of, right? Little more than I can chew." Don't worry about that. For one, okay, so you got the rule book. So you're going to go through the rule book, right? It's going to tell you, okay, how to set up. It's got all these images. It's got all these examples for you. This is not like you're busting out an old Avalon Hill or SPI game where it's just a bunch of case point stuff. See? So, yes, there are a lot of rules, but they're not as many as you think there are. And once you kind of get the gist of the game, the most important rules are all right here. The turn sequence, combat sequence, your test modifiers, your action success table, and so forth. Over here, which kind of gets lost a little bit in the board, but when you've got it in front of you, you're fine. Shows you the action costs for different things you can do. You got the ship placement priority. This is when you're reviewing these hidden ships. More hidden ships are coming out. And then talking about uprising cubes. So there's what's known as a lull turn that can possibly take place, which is bad for you and good for the Imperial powers. So if you are trying to incite rebellion with the native peoples and that, lull turns aren't cool. They work against you because it gives the Imperial powers pretty much kind of an opportunity to remove the cubes that you've earned as far as inciting unrest. All right, so we got basically the tour of the board. So we've done that, and as you can maybe hear, Pinky's strolled down here. Brian Sweet, I thought the rule book was not too great. Way too wordy and took very roundabout ways of explaining the rules. I would agree with that. One thing that you do want to keep in mind if you're not familiar with Victory Point games, especially the old days of Victory Point games, is that, and I forgot, I'm not up here in the corner, right? So I'm looking at the camera, talking like, oh, you can see me. No, you can't. Here, I'll do that. So I think we know what's going on with this corner up here. As far as Victory Point games, they used to have that old style case point for all of their rules. In fact, it's not within reach. I've got some of the older Ziploc Victory Point games up in the corner there. And if I open them up, you would look and you would see it's like 1.1.7, blah, blah, blah. So I have to point out the rule book here is actually better than the original rules were. But yes, I agree. I think it is a little too wordy. I think it could have been trimmed down. In some ways, it sort of reminds me of some role-playing game adventures, right? All that like read aloud text and all the other background stuff that doesn't matter when you got the game at the table. Not the worst rule book around though, but yeah, I could see where you're kind of like, rule book could have used a little more editing. All right, so anyway, so what you're basically gonna do throughout the game, let me put my reading specs back on. So yeah, so we're back to how it usually looks when I'm doing an unboxing or a review. So you're gonna start off, and every turn, I'm gonna just move this out here. You're gonna flip over one of the adventure cards. So you're gonna flip over the adventure card. Now, this is the prologue card. This is the only prologue card that there is. Kind of surprised because there are a variety. There's a bunch of finale cards. I guess the prologue's not that big a deal, but same thing with the intermission cards. They're the same. There's no difference. So basically, all this is telling us, this is kind of like, oh well, hey. So this is the story to this point, which is okay. So something weird's going on. It's going to tell us we're going to leave this card kind of out so we can see it, because it's going to tell us that when we do our placement phase, we're going to roll 2 dice for the placement phase, and that's going to determine where do we have new hidden ships appearing, as well as how many action points we will get during that turn. And as with just about every victory point game title that's out there, especially looking at, like, say, Dawn of the Zeds, or if you go back to the States of Siege games, Cruel Necessity from my friend John Welsh, you never have enough action points to do what you really want to do. So one of the aspects of a lot of the victory point games titles is that you really have to kind of balance risk and reward. So, all right, so we would take this first one, and basically all it's going to tell us is we're going to roll a white die. I'll just use this little box top here. It's going to tell us, okay, so that is the ocean that the Nautilus is in. So the Nautilus is in the Eastern Pacific. Okay, so we're going to actually use 2 white dice for our placement phase. Now, we also have black dice. We have another white die. These can eventually get added to the mix here. So it's going to say, okay, so commence play with the next card. So we're not actually going to perform a turn in the prologue. We are going to for our first adventure card. So the first thing that we do is you're basically taking an event card. So you're going to flip over your event, and we got a pearl worth 10 million. Now, one aspect of Nemo's War in the first edition that you really can't pull off in the second edition is, now these events are all numbered. If you take a look at the top center of the card, you do see a number here. You used to be able to actually line these all up and play the deck out, and that actually followed the events of the novel itself. Can't really do that anymore because there's too many cards. So you're only playing 31 cards from your adventure deck. There's way more than that. And then, of course, whichever motive you choose is how you'll actually build up the deck. So for an example, because we're doing an exploration, there are many more cards before the first intermission when these other warships come into play than if, say, we were playing a war motive. All right, so basically we get some text from the novel itself. So it says, we keep this card. When in the Indian Ocean for 1 action, I may test for 10. And I can also try to wager a crew resource. If I pass, I get to collect 3 and then treasure. And then if I fail, I gain a notoriety. And then it says at game's end, pass if unused. Right? So I'm gonna hold on to this card. Now down below the board itself, you should have an area. I should explain these guys. They're sitting down here in the tableau, which really isn't a tableau, but you should have an area of the table that below the board where you're going to have the crew, the special crew, some of the characters, the special characters from the novel itself. And you'll have these characters. You can spend these characters, some at any time, some following once you've rolled your dice. You can spend these characters for one time, and then you basically flip them over. Now, some of them will have a negative effect. So, for example, the first officer, I could spend this, and I can get 3 actions, or I can get +3 to any roll after I rolled. If I happen to do that, though, it's going to cost me Nemo dropping 1. So, got to keep in mind So for an example, we got the second officer here. If I spend that second officer, I'm going to get an extra action. Flip it over. It doesn't do anything. Doesn't have any additional negative cost. Let's say, for an example, I use Ned Land. That gives me a +1. That's going to actually bump up my notoriety by 1. And then, of course, that character is gone. That character is no longer available. So, Conceal, if I use Conceal, played by, if I remember right, it's Peter Lorre in the Disney movie. If I were to use him, I get to re-roll any die roll, and doesn't have any other additional negative effect on me. But then again, that's it. I only get to use that once. Now, at the end of the game, you will get victory points for characters that you didn't use. So that's kind of cool too. So if you're able to make it through the game without having to spend your characters, you're in good shape. Okay, so for an example, we would end up keeping this. We would keep this card. So it's an event, but it's not something going on right now. So once we've done that, then we're going to move into what we call our placement phase. So we're going to roll the 2 white dice because we're still in the prologue. And we're going to get a 3 and a 5. So we get a 3 and a 5. So that means we're going to deduct the lower from the higher. And that's going to tell us how many action points we get. So we're going to get 2 action points because 3 from 5 is 2. Now, it also tells us that we're going to also place more ships. So we're going to put 2 more ships out here. So we're going to go with, we've got a 3 is North Atlantic, and we've got 5, which is the European seas. Now, as we see here, the European seas are filled up now. Another way you can lose the game, I told you, there's a lot of ways for you to lose this game. One of the ways to lose the game is to have ships filling up every single one of these spots. All of these spots are filled. And what'll happen here is you'll see it'll start to overflow. So once this is filled up, now if I were to roll this again next turn where I have to put a hidden ship marker in here, then this is already filled. I can't do anything with this, so I'd have to either go to the North Atlantic, or because we've got the little dots here, I could go to the Indian Ocean. So even though I couldn't travel from the European Sea to the Indian Ocean in the Nautilus, I can use that for the overflow as far as with the ships. All right, so once we did that, we finished that up. So I have 2 action points. So for my 2 action points, I can draw an adventure card, which is actually up here. This is the adventure deck. So these are both the same cards. It's just the ones that don't get used in this deck go into this optional deck. I can attack. I can either boldly attack, or I can try to stalk a ship, find out what it is before I decide to attack it. That costs me 1. I can use 1 to try to incite the native peoples. I can use 1 to move 1 ocean. I can use 2 to rest to regain crew. I can use 2 to repair to try to regain hull points. I can spend 2 to refit. And that is to try to get an upgrade to the Nautilus. Or I can search for treasure. So the reality is, as explorers, searching for treasure is good. We want to be able to search for treasure. Now, as far as the ships themselves, when we have a hidden ship, we actually have to reach in and find out. And I'm not looking. All right, got to find out what it is. Okay, so it is an ironclad. It's the Lord Clyde. So if we get warships, then we might have to actually fight the warship. Then we've got the combat sequence over here. And it's pretty easy. You're basically you're going up against the warship's value. So in order to try to sink it. Combat's pretty easy. Then, as far as like your actions, we've got your action success table here. So let's say we were going to look to, hey, you know what? Let's search for treasure. Now, if I wanted to, I could risk, I shouldn't say spend, I could risk my resources, my ship resources, either Nemo, the crew, or the hull, to try to get a modifier, to get a bonus to my dice roll. So the thing is, so for an example, let's say, okay, so I'm going to throw crew. I'm going to risk a crew point to get +3 to my 2 dice. Rolling my 2 dice. So I would actually have 13 on a search. I would get to collect 2 treasures. So I would reach in here. So I'm using one of my action points to search for treasure. So I would get retain X for 1 action or keep for 2 victory points. Now, keeping in mind, because we're explorers, this is good for an additional victory point. So it's really worth 3. Or I can actually spend it to get a free action. This would then go into my collected treasures. So if, for an example, later on I was like, man, I really need to use, I got to get another action. I really need another action. I'd be like, okay, well, hey, I can spend this and I could get an action. So then I would have to put it in discarded treasures, which now I don't get victory points for. So remember, I pointed out before, you need a bunch of victory points to even have a chance for any success here. So once again, all your actions are right here, what you can do. Give me another example. Let's go the Coral Realm. Okay, so we got a test. Here we go. Cool. So we got a test here. It says Captain Nemo and his men had come to bury their companion in his communal resting place on the inaccessible ocean floor. So we see we've got a test. It's a 10. Oh, I should point out, if you do not fail on your roll, you do not lose that resource that you that you spent. Okay, so here we see test 10, resource C. So resource C is crew. So I am going to risk resource crew to get a +3 to my 2 dice. And I'm looking to get a 10. Of course, to be honest, it isn't really going to do much for me because I can't really get more crew than I already got, but still got to do it. Oh, look at that. 3 + 3 is 6. I fail. So, okay, so I fail, right? So I'm going to lose that, and I also lose a crew. And then, because I failed, I know we shouldn't be keeping this up here. We should have it down on our plateau, but still. I would put that in the fail category. Because some of the adventure cards will actually have victory points for you. You'll get victory points for the various different action, or I should say adventure cards, event cards, if you want to say. So for an example, got another one. 42nd degree centigrade. The panels had opened and I could see a completely white sea around the Nautilus. Steaming sulfurous fumes uncoiled in the midst of waves, bubbling like water in a boiler. I leaned my hand against one of the windows, but the heat was so great I had to snatch it back. So we see it's another test 10. If we pass, we gain a hull. If we fail, we have to lose 1 Nemo resource or 1 hull. Well, we're not getting too exciting events yet. So once again, so you're seeing, okay, so you could risk a Nemo or you could risk a hull, or you could risk both if you want. In a case like this, if we risk both, we get a +4 to our die roll. And we would get a 13, so we would pass. Now, granted, we don't gain the hull, but we do pass. And this is going to go, and it's going to show us, it's a science discovered. So it's showing we're getting a victory point for science discovered, which actually, as explorers, since we passed this, this is actually worth 4 victory points because we've got the science discovered right here, and it shows us multiply it by 4. So you're just going to continue on, especially as an explorer. You're not looking to, you're not really looking to try to engage a lot of shipping unless, for an example, you've taken some damage from some poor test failures, and you can use some of the salvage. You're probably going to be looking at trying to sink non-warships as opposed to warships. Now, if you were to actually get into battle, then you're going to take a look at your attacking ship. You're going to roll 2 dice, and you're looking at trying to beat the 7 up here. So, oh, that'd be terrible. So we would, and of course, once again, you can risk resources, but so I would get a 4. The Nautilus would actually lose 3 hull points. So it's the difference. If you're above the ship modifier, then you're gonna sink it. If it's below it, you're gonna take hits from it, and the battle's gonna continue on. Combat's pretty easy. You will see that you've got the upgrades. I almost said outfit. It's like, why would I do that? You've got the upgrades. You've got torpedoes that are pretty cool as one of your upgrades. It's kind of funny too, because you can sit there and be like, okay, well, I'm going to do a stalk attack, where you get a modifier. You could do a bold attack, and you've got this little ring that you can utilize. So that's pretty sweet. That is pretty cool. So it's you get some options. There's different things that you can try to utilize as far as combat. Combat will, of course, get much more difficult as you continue the game, because the navies out there are not only sending out more ships to try to hunt down the Nautilus, they're also retrofitting the ships as well, refitting the ships as well, so that they have more firepower to try to take the Nautilus down. So eventually what's going to happen is you're going to go through your adventure cards, and you're finally going to get to the point where, oh, okay, so there would have been 3 more cards in this adventure before we got to our finale. So our finale here is the Maelstrom. It says, Maelstrom, Maelstrom, they were shouting. The Maelstrom. Could a more frightening name have rung in our ears under more frightening circumstances? So you would need to get a 12. You could spend any of your Nautilus resources, Nemo, crew, or hull. If you pass, you would pass and the game ends. If you were to fail, you would lose 1d3 crew and 1d6 hull, and then the game ends. So once the game has ended, what you're going to do is you're actually, whoops, as I drop cards on the floor like an idiot. Grab this other one over here. Come on, you. I haven't done that in a long time, dropping stuff on the floor. So what you're eventually going to do is you're going to start tallying up all your victory points. You're going to be tallying up victory points for treasures, for your liberation cubes that you've been able to get going, ships, warships that you've sunk, non-warships that you've sunk, science that you've discovered, so on and so forth. Then you're going to crack out the epilogue book. So you're going to look at the epilogue, and right here, you already know, regardless of what your motive is, the level of victory. So you need 250 victory points or more for success. Less than or equal to 185 is defeat. 185 to 219 is failure. 220 to 249 is inconsequential, and 275 or more is a triumph. And then, depending on which your motives were, you're going to read. So we've got defeat, failure, inconsequential, success, triumph, science, and it's just, you know, a paragraph or two, kind of doing an epilogue. And then you find, and of course, if you've lost by way of Nemo becoming broken, your crew being killed, or basically the Nautilus being sunk, or having no place else to go with ships on the board here on the map, or hitting a notoriety level that ends in defeat, you're just going to read the defeat paragraph down here. All right, so that is pretty much how you play Nemo's War. As I mentioned, I wasn't going to go through a complete playthrough, because there are loads and loads of people out there who already have done playthroughs. One thing I should mention too, these little gems for the treasures in that, you'll notice some of the oceans don't have treasures. So when you are in an ocean that has a treasure, that's when you can search for the treasures. Okay, so, and of course there's more treasures than that with the, there we go, as I switch cameras. There's more treasures than that in the adventure cards, in the event cards that come up. Like we saw, I think wasn't it the first one we pulled out there? We're showing, oh, hey, and if you pass this, you actually get to pull a treasure. So that's another way you're going to get different treasures, different wonders, things like that. So what do I think of Nemo's War 2nd edition from Victory Point Games? All right, so I got to point out, I've mentioned it before leading up to this review. I really enjoyed the 1st edition of Nemo's War. This was back at a time when there were not a lot of reviewers who would actually do reviews for any of the Victory Point games, because the Victory Point games came in Ziploc bags. In fact, crap, nope, not over there. Rats! Should have thought ahead and grabbed one and had it sitting here so I could show it off. But it was, they came in Ziploc bags, and that, I mean, they weren't terrible, I swear. I mean, the component quality was as good as some stuff I see coming in boxes, I'll tell you that much. But, some people were like, poo-poo. Oh, it doesn't have big plastic miniatures and stuff like that. Oh, I don't want to even bother with this. Well, I wasn't like that. I like games. If it's a good game, I don't really care that much about the components all that much. The only time I ever really concern myself too much with components is if the components are going to fall apart. Like if it's really flimsy card stock, or if it's or if like the ink is coming off of the counters on my hands, or from the rule book on my hands. Well, yeah, then I'm going to say, all right, so the components are an issue. But I really like the 1st edition. I was a little concerned that the 2nd edition would maybe kind of throw a little too much stuff in. Something that happened with Dawn of the Zeds in the 3rd edition of Dawn of the Zeds was, it was almost as if, and it's still an excellent game, don't get me wrong, really, really love it. But it was starting to get to the point where it's kind of like, it's sort of like everything in the kitchen sink. Kind of losing the easy, introduction to the game. But that's not the case. I think the component quality is really good. I'll be the first to point out, I would have liked to have seen a deeper cut on the Nautilus miniature. Maybe made the miniature a little bit bigger. I mean, you can paint it up. I just don't think it's going to really stand out that much. But really dig the components. I like the fact that there's more adventure cards. There's more cards in the deck, at least to my memory, than there were in the 1st edition. I like that it feels like there's more to it than just what's in the book. Although I swear, I think every single adventure card is something from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It just seems that it's not as tied down into it. So, for an example, in the first edition, when you played, if you were playing with the cards out of order, right? Because as I mentioned before, you could line them up in the order, the numerical order, and basically play through 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But if if when you shuffle them all up, sometimes it came across a little oddly. It'd be like, okay, so how's this suddenly going on? So you would kind of have to like kind of what's the word I'm looking for? You'd sort of extend your disbelief, I guess, something like that. Which, of course, it's a fictional science fiction book anyway. But it didn't have the same kind of narrative continuity. I don't really see this as much. A little bit, but not as much as I noticed in the first edition when you had the cards just shuffled up out of order. I really like Nemo's War. Now, I'll be the first to point out, I did not play it as a cooperative game. I'm used to playing it solitaire. I like it solitaire. I like the fact that you can have different motives. If you want to play this as, Captain Nemo, the war game, by all means, you can do so. If you want to play it as Captain Nemo, Man of Peace, or Misunderstood Scientist, you can play it that way, where you're kind of a good guy, or at least an anti-hero, which Nemo actually kind of is an anti-hero. But I like that fact. Now, one of the expansions I do understand provides 2 new motives. Now, those expansions aren't out yet. They were part of a Kickstarter that finished up not too long ago. I think it's a great way to spend about 90 minutes to 2 hours. I will point out it's probably going to run you about 2 hours if things are going good. One thing I will point out, it is a lot of luck, a lot of die rolling. It is very possible for you to go on a bad streak of die rolls. And in fact, we just saw, I had a +3 trying to get a 10 and rolled a 6 total. So, I mean, it does happen where you can just go on a streak where everything just is not coming up roses for you. That might bother some people. I don't mind that. I like chaos in my games. I like luck in my games. I don't necessarily like games that are just like a puzzle where there's absolutely no randomness in it. It's just figure this puzzle out. So at the end of the day, on a scale of 1 to 10, I give Nemo's War a very, very extremely solid 9.6. Personally, if you have the first edition of the game, which I don't think there's a lot of you out there who do, I would say, yeah, pick it up because, of course, obviously enough, way, way better component quality and everything else. But don't feel like you have to because the first edition is still really, really good if you've got it. That said, I guarantee a vast majority of people out there do not have the first edition of Nemo's War. So yes, I am strongly recommending Nemo's War as a solitaire game. I can't tell you how it plays as a cooperative or semi-co-op. I can see the co-op is probably fine. Semi-cooperative kind of has almost like, mutiny and taking over as the captain and stuff like that. I don't know about that. But as a solitaire game, yes, it is aces. Definitely something you really should pick up. If you enjoy solitaire games, if you like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, then by all means, this is a must-have. This really is a must-have. All right, so that's it for today's show. I do want to point out on tomorrow's show, I will be reviewing Battlestar Galactica Starship Battles from Ares Games. So we're going to take a peek at that. I'll tell you right now, it'll be a shorter review than tonight's was, that's for sure. So that's on tomorrow's show. On Wednesday's show, it's Wargame Wednesday. I will be unboxing Talon 1000. This is the expansion for the Talon science fiction. This is another kind of starfighter game from GMT Games. This is the newest expansion for it. We're going to take a peek at that. On Thursday, I've got some RPG stuff. Still up in the air on exactly what it's going to be. All right, so that is it. Do want to point out, once again, in case you missed the announcement earlier, from here on out, the Gaming Gang and the Daily Dope, any funds that come in, and I'm talking like advertisers, all this different stuff, any funds that come in that are above and beyond what it takes to operate the website is going to go to charity. Yeah, that's right. It's going to go to Lil Bub's Big Fund. That's right. I'm sorry, folks. I am going to be talking about this every day for a couple of minutes on every show. So, yeah, strap in. I know people complain about it, but hey, it is what it is. It's how it's going to be. All right. So, as I like to point out, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, comics, movies, TV. Well, by now you know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. I will be back tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Thanks again for watching The Daily Dope, presented by The Gaming Gang. If you like this episode, be sure to give it a quick thumbs up. And if you dig the channel, please subscribe. If you'd like to check out our previous episode, click right here. And if you want to check out a somewhat randomly selected episode, give a click right down here. It'll be like opening a box of Cracker Jacks. You just don't know what you'll get. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'm Jeff McAleer.